Mr. Malone, you're a scientist. You're not any scientist. You made a name during the time of the pandemics. Your work played a vital role within the whole scheme and everything that the WHO did and that Pfizer did. And
was it Pfizer? I would call it Pfizer and Moderna.
Yes.
I think WHO was a colluder, not the primary driver.
So my first question would be, what happened to science? What is done with science?
So during my career, which is now almost 40 years, I've watched the gradual creeping hand of corruption spread throughout the scientific endeavor. The enterprise that I thought I was committing my life to with my career decisions really no longer exists. Pure science is a fantasy because the type of work that I used to do involving molecular virology and biodefense and vaccine development, that type of work is no longer possible without massive amounts of capital. And with massive amounts of capital comes control. And that control is exerted by very large national interests in the form of governmental sponsorship, whether it's the Department of Defense or the Department of Health and Human Services, or it comes with the ties to pharmaceutical industry. No one can afford to develop new products and take them through clinical research to licensure without the resources of hundreds of millions to billions of dollars. And with that comes the corruption of science per se.
But it sounds like nowadays there's kind of an intrinsic corruption within science.
So science is not one thing. Let me be clear on that. I'm speaking about the domains that I'm familiar with and that I've had to work with over time, in particular infectious disease research.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure there are domains within science that remain pure. And I know that there are many scientists who have good hearts who aren't corrupted. But there's also no question that big science has come to dominate the domains of infectious disease and medicine in general. And with that domination of the pharmaceutical industry and, quote, big science, has come this systemic corruption and compromise, all in the interest of chasing the almighty buck.
So nowadays, the big science, pharmaceutical science, seems to be intertwined with not just the big financial interest, but also political.
And why would you expect it to be otherwise?
I think
it's the way the world has gone, right? It's not just science; it's everything around us. It's finance, it's all of health, it's agriculture. It's land policy. It's everything around us has been compromised by this quest for power and capital. And if we worship capital, if we worship wealth and power, if we enable narcissists, this is what we get. The world has to go, apparently, through a major crisis in order to get back to a point where we value more fundamental principles of humanity, community, ethics, fundamental commitment to right and wrong. Where have these things gone? They've been sacrificed on the altar of wealth and power. And until we recognize this and we decide that we're going to reject that, we're doomed to continuing to see these kinds of behaviors.
So we need a catharsis, a real...
well put. A catharsis is exactly what we need, and I'm afraid it's going to come at us very hard and fast in the form of economic change. And we are now moving into a multilateral world, a fragmented multilateral world, which is very dangerous.
Yes.
But it also, I argue, is absolutely necessary if we're going to enable innovation. We cannot have innovation under a single world authority. We must allow independent nation states to have the sovereignty and autonomy to experiment with different models economically and to learn from each other's experience. For instance, I find, and many people agree with me, that one of the most interesting social and political experiments and economic experiments currently happening in the world is happening in Argentina under Javier Milei. Now, we don't know how that's going to turn out. We don't know if Javier Milei will survive. We don't know if he will succeed. But I celebrate the experiment of watching Argentina try to solve its own problems.
Yeah. Maybe not just economically own in different ways, maybe even politically, different systems that
Absolutely.
Different ideas.
Absolutely. It's time for diversity.
Yeah.
We should celebrate and empower diversity, not drive towards centralized command economies. This is something that the former Eastern Bloc understands. When I visit former Eastern Bloc countries, they all understand the problem of centralized planning. And they are often the greatest champions of diversity and freedom. And it's because they have experienced the alternative. I think we need to listen to them.
That's pretty funny because I come from Germany. You know, Germany has been divided into East and West.
I'm very aware of that.
And the East Germans are way smarter than the West Germans.
I am very aware of that amazing paradox that now Western Germany, which used to look down on the Eastern Germans, is turning to them for insight and for experience in these changing political times.
Yes. So you have been a scientist, you're still a scientist, but nowadays you're more like a political activist. Are you happy with that?
It's a necessary thing. So I've, over the last 3 years, in our original book, The Lies My Government Told Me, and the book we're working on right now, Psychological Warfare in the American Government, I've been trying to understand what has happened. What has been the course of history? What has got us to this point? And in that journey, I've come to appreciate that the issue is not medical freedom. The issue is not pharmaceutical industry corruption. The issue is freedom. And the players that are involved are complex, multifactorial. They absolutely involve the American intelligence community and its extended arms of the Five Eyes intelligence community.
Deep State?
Deep State is actually only captures part of it. That's a very convenient term that's hard to define. So I think it's more useful to think of these power blocks and their kind of organizational imperatives. And clearly the American intelligence community and the extended embodiment of the intelligence community has had an operational role in the COVID crisis, central operational role. And it doesn't, I personally don't believe that it has been the one directing those activities. That's the conclusion I've come to. It's been central in the execution and operation of many of those activities, but I don't believe it's been central to the planning and overall strategic and tactical guidance. I think that there are other groups behind this, and I believe that what we've seen deployed is something that I call psychological bioterrorism. There's a former Soviet agent that was involved in information warfare that calls this information bioterrorism or information blackmail. I think, and he's laid out in an interview in 2017 in New Zealand. He left the Soviet intelligence service and moved to New Zealand. He lays out a series of tactical steps that are used when deploying information bioterrorism. And those tactical steps are exactly mirrored in the actions that occurred during the COVID crisis. I believe we're dealing with something deep. I don't fully understand who or what is behind it. There are many theories. I'm positive that it's not Klaus Schwab who is the puppet master.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm positive that it's not Tony Fauci that's the puppet master. I'm positive that Peter Daszak knows who the puppet master is. And that's about as far as I can go.
I wouldn't go that far. But when I try to explain thoughts of this, I use a black hole. Yeah, you cannot see it, you cannot measure it. You can just watch everything around it, and you know that.
Well, what you can do is you can identify the event horizon.
Yes, exactly. You see everything else. Yeah, you know something must be there. Yeah? I got a last question for you. Right now, some people in some media start to try. It looks like a new panic. It's the bird flu.
Absolutely.
In the States.
And I speak out about that almost every day.
Yeah. So, do you think the same actors? Do you think different actors?
Absolutely, the same actors.
Same actors.
And so this is another example of information or psychological bioterrorism that's going on. Just to recap key points. And the weapon that we can deploy to counter this kind of bioterrorism, this information or psychological bioterrorism, is knowledge.
Yes.
Okay, so here's some key knowledge bullet points relating to H5N1. H5N1, otherwise known as bird flu, is endemic in waterfowl. Migratory waterfowl have had H5N1 infections for decades, if not all of history. There is no way to eradicate H5N1. Number two, humans have basically all encountered neuraminidase number 1. That's the N1 part. They've all encountered influenza A, which is what this is. It's a variant of influenza A.
So it's not a danger.
So they all have partial immunity. They generally have not encountered hemagglutinin number 5, that's H5, because H5 is evolved for bird receptors. Okay? There is no current evidence of sustained human-to-human transmission or even mammal-to-mammal transmission of H5N1. There are 2 cases of H5N1 in humans that have been reported recently in the United States. Both of them involve dairy workers.
Yes.
Now, the FDA and the European CDC and the WHO report that the case fatality rate of H5N1 is 50 to 60%. That's a false number. It reflects what's called reporting bias. Okay? It's an analytical data bias because it's only capturing those cases that present to hospitalists, basically, with severe disease. Okay? And no surprise, because they have some defect in their immune system or they got a huge dose of H5N1 because they were slaughtering ducks or something. No surprise that those people have developed severe disease. And once they're identified as having severe disease, they have a high mortality rate. But that doesn't reflect what happens when H5N1 is encountered by you and me, healthy humans. In fact, we've probably all been experienced with H5N1 if we've ever gone swimming in a mountain lake that is inhabited or visited by ducks and geese, because ducks and geese poop huge amounts of influenza virus into the water, and that influenza virus survives long periods of time in water. Okay? Cows that drink from open water sources where ducks and geese have landed are exposed to H5N1. Now, those 2 cases in the United States in dairy workers, did they die? Did they get very sick? No, they developed pink eye, which they recovered from spontaneously. Okay? So if it had a 50 to 60% case fatality rate, one of them would already be dead and the other would be sick.
Yes.
That hasn't happened. Okay? So don't fear H5N1. Now, there's a caveat. There has been gain-of-function research on H5N1.
Oh.
That was done at the Rasmus Institute and at the University of Wisconsin. It was the thing that caused the original suspension of gain-of-function research under the Obama administration. These people published these results, and so it's known, it's in the scientific literature. An experienced bioengineer can engineer a infectious H5N1 that will be transmitted from mammal to mammal. Okay? But here's the thing. They did those studies in ferrets. Okay? And they showed that those ferrets can transmit from one ferret to another by aerosols, by breathing. Okay? But the question you should ask is, did the ferrets die? The answer is no. Okay? Yes, it was transmitted, but it wasn't particularly pathogenic. So all this fear that the WHO and the gods of infectious disease and the gods of the biopharmaceutical vaccine industry are spreading is just that. It's just weaponized fear. It is information or propaganda, information bioterrorism, it's psychological bioterrorism, and they should be shamed for doing it. They should be forced to take these things back. They should be shamed, and they should be excluded from the press. But the press loves to amplify these stories. You know, if it bleeds, it leads. It sells newspapers. It sells clicks. It sells likes. It generates revenue. Fear generates revenue. We must stop this. It is unethical.
Mr. Malone, thank you very much.